our game review series of videos, we'll be looking at some of my favorite games from back in the 80s and perhaps the early 90s for the Commodore 64. We're going to be evaluating these games based on 5 criteria. The first, the box and the contents and shelf appeal of the game. Next, graphics, how well the game looks. We're going to look at the quality of the sound and music, keeping in mind that the Commodore had the SID chip, which was really good for the era and had a lot of capabilities. We're going to look at gameplay, which includes things like loading, load times, controllers, and just in general how annoying is the game to play. And then finally, replayability. Is this something that you want to play again and again and again? We're going to rate each of these criteria on a scale from 1 to 10, and at the end we'll have a score from 0 to 50 for each game that we look at. Hi everyone, and welcome back to the Commodore Room. Today we're going to take a look at one of my favorite games for the old Commodore 64, Project Space Station. If this was on the shelf at your local computer store, would this make you want to buy it? You know, back in the 80s, there weren't a standard size to game boxes like there are today. So today, if you go to the store, your PS4 and your Xbox or your Switch, all those games are the same size, the same packaging, and they don't take up much shelf space. Back in the 80s, there were no such standards. And actually, retailers didn't like that because some of the boxes were absolutely huge, as you'll see in some of the other upcoming videos in our series here. But some of them were really small. So this is actually a fairly decent size. It's certainly a good book-size package. It just so happens that I have another package for Project Space Station, which was a little bit smaller, as you can see. Retailers liked the smaller boxes because they gave them more shelf space. They could get more games in that same amount of real estate than they could any other way. So, if you want to talk about, shelf appeal, the question is, which of these is the best? Certainly this looks very cool because, seriously, who doesn't like the space shuttle? That's kind of awesome. And then over here, you have really the same picture, but I actually like this packaging a lot more on the outside. If we turn them over, we're going to see very similar on the back. So looking at the back, you'll see that there's pretty much the same type of information, similar graphics. But really, I think both of these look pretty good on the shelf. If I was going to pick, to be honest, I think I would go with this box as being the one that has more shelf appeal. But actually, this is the earlier packaging. And as you'll see when we open it up, I think the insides of this is a little bit nicer. But I think this looks cooler on the shelf. Okay, so let's go ahead and open the box. So what you'll see here is, of course, the disc, which we'll pull out here. This disc is certainly nothing special, 1985, so you can see the year it was made. And so the disc sleeve is nothing special, it's just a white disc sleeve. And then, of course, the label is about as generic as you could get. It looks like they printed it on a printer on their Commodore and just slapped it on there, so nothing great there. You've got here the instruction manual, your warranty card, and then this nice little note here that says, if you send us another 11 bucks, we'll send you another copy of the disc. It might be kind of fun to send a letter to this address and see what happens. Probably nothing. But you can see here the manual. The manual, Project Space Station, is actually pretty good. It goes through lots of detail. The quality of the manual could be a bit better. It again looks like it was printed on a Commodore, on maybe a dot matrix printer. It's not the worst I've seen, but it's certainly not one of the best. The good thing about it is it's incredibly thorough. Back in the 80s, when you would buy a game, part of the fun was looking at the box on the way home and then sitting down and literally for an hour you could read these instruction manuals just so you knew how to play the game. One thing to keep in mind is that the Commodore era computers just didn't have a lot of memory. There weren't a ton of on-screen help and a lot of just space to put information. So sometimes the books were substantial. This book, just to give you an idea, this book is 89 pages long. Now the really cool part about this game, and if you're a space nerd, it is really a good game. You can see they go into some pretty gory detail, and even in the back, suggested further reading, the Space Shuttle Operator's Manual, Illustrated Encyclopedia of Space Technology, and then, if you're a science fiction fan, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy by Douglas Adams. So that's kind of hilarious. Again, really nice manual. To be honest, the quality could be a bit better, I think, the finish. But from a technical perspective, it really goes into great detail and tells you everything you need to know in order to play this game. And just as a quick note of comparison, if we were to look at the other packaging, which is a couple years newer, and as you can see, distributed by Advantage, whereas the previous one was HESWare, the disc definitely looks better. It looks a little bit more polished. They actually have a label that doesn't look crappy. Doesn't look like it was printed at home, so that's good. And it is, as you can see here, distributed by Advantage from Accolade, so Accolade had something to do with this. And, of course, your Accolade sales material, your Advantage warranty card, and then the manual. You can see here the manual has went on a big diet. It no longer has some of the detail in it. You don't see the pictures of the graphics. There's no further reading. It's just a lot simpler. Definitely prefer the previous manual. It was a lot better. Another interesting thing to note, and you can see it on here, this game was released for a few different platforms, the Apple 8-bit line, and then also the IBM version. I've actually played a couple of these, and it nowhere near as good. The Commodore 64 version, in my opinion, is by far the best version of this game. But back in the day, lots of games were released on lots of different platforms. And unlike your Xbox or your PS4 or soon-to-be PS5s, there was a big difference. You might not find much of a difference between an Xbox and a PS4 game, but you will find a very big difference between an IBM, an Apple, and a Commodore version of games. The Atari computers and some of the other ones were pretty close, but some of them were pretty far away. The Apple II series just didn't have anywhere near the sound or graphics capabilities as the Commodore or the Atari. So my favorite version of this game by far is the Commodore 64 version.
From the box, it looks like Project Space Station is a game that allows me to design and manage a space station. So let's go ahead and fire this up. What I'm going to use is the SX64 from the previous video. So we'll go ahead and get this guy loading up. One thing that stands out pretty much immediately with this game is how complex it is. The overall goal of your space station is to really do research. And to be able to fund yourself based on the research and as you'll see here, satellite deployments. So you can deploy satellites as necessary, launch them into 2 different orbits in order to get revenue to fund your research, which hopefully goes well, and then also funds further research in your station operations. So here on the planning screen, you'll see that there's quite a bit that you can do, from budgeting to equipment and crew selection to all sorts of other aspects of planning and scheduling the operations of your space station. When you're looking at the crew selection specifically, you're getting into the personality of the crew members, which is important later on and during research, because all these guys and gals are, they're locked on a space station, so they have to get along with each other in order for anything to go well. So you don't want a lot of fighting with your crew. So you have to read their bios and pick people that you think will get along. And that's just one aspect of the detail that's involved in this. When you get into doing research and funding research and whatnot, there's all sorts of different avenues, and there's just dozens of different things that you can do from a research perspective. So hopefully you can see here, get a glimpse of some of the complexity of the game. This type of simulation is exactly what I like. I like the details. On the Commodore computers, there just weren't a lot of games that provided this level of depth. But from a simulation perspective, this is one of the best. You can see that the graphics are pretty good in the game. Certainly for the time, everything represents what you think it is, and there's a nice look and feel to everything. The controls are all, for the most part, the joystick. You will have to hit the keyboard on occasion, but not too much. And so it really actually flows pretty nicely. It is a game, and so there is a couple fun parts to it. Launching your space shuttle, or one of the space shuttles, is fun. The first couple times you do it, and then after that it gets a little bit more annoying. You can see here you want to keep the shuttle, your little white shuttle there, in the squares as it's moving around, and the better job you do, the closer to the space station that you will be when you get into orbit. And kind of the same thing with landing. You come down, you want to kind of gauge your speed and your altitude so that you land just right. Worst possible thing is that you'll damage the space shuttle and it needs to be in repair longer. 28 days is the maximum repair period. After a few times of launching and landing, to be honest, it gets kind of old. And you will learn that you don't always need to do it just right. If your program is working well and your research is working well, you can just let it land wherever you want. You don't even have to bother with it. And yeah, it tears it up, but that's okay. And depending on why you're launching a shuttle, you may not actually have to be close at all. The other place where you're going to use the joystick a lot is launching satellites or constructing your space station. As you see, you move the little guy around and you can maneuver the pieces and whatnot. It is kind of easy to damage the little EVA pod there, the little guy who's floating around in space. And if he stays out there too long, he will die, and he'll show up as dead in your crew selection screens. So you can kill people. Not probably something you want to do, obviously, for a variety of reasons, but it is possible. So there is a lot of aspects to the gameplay that are pretty good, and then there's some annoying pieces, specifically launching and landing. So one thing you're going to notice in this game is really the lack of sound. You've heard a little bit of the sound effects as I've been showing some of the stuff here, and that's about it. There really isn't anything else. There's no music of any kind, and it's kind of a shame that they weren't able to come up with a way to take advantage of the SID chip and some of the capabilities. But for me, and to be honest, I will trade that for gameplay, and this game does have some great gameplay. There is one other annoyance that I'll mention. Disk access is not bad. It does happen fairly frequently, but it's not long, unless you accidentally hit the help icon there at the top, in which case it's a bit longer, and it does have a pretty comprehensive help system. But if you don't mean to hit it and you do, then you're going to waste a good 20-30 seconds waiting for that thing to appear and then getting out of it. Beyond that, though, it's a pretty good game. Okay, and now it's time for the Commodore Room score. When it comes to box and contents, I'm going to give this game a 6. The boxes could be a lot better, and to be honest, back in the 80s when this was on the shelf, there was a lot better out there. But it's not bad, so I'm going to give it a 6. When it comes to graphics, the animation, there's just not much. There are good graphics. They are intuitive. I'm going to go ahead and give it a 6. When it comes to sound, or lack thereof, I really can't do anything but a 2. The sound is good when it's there, but there's just not enough of it, and there's just no music of any kind, which I think is a shame when it comes to the SID that was in the Commodore 64. When it comes to gameplay, though, I've got to give this game a 7. It works really nicely. If you accidentally hit the help screen, that kind of stinks. The completely annoying and repetitive nature of launching and landing really does start to wear on you after a while, and so we're going to go ahead and stick with a 7 on gameplay. And when it comes to replayability, given all of the things that I've just said, this game is fun. If you like complexity, you like simulations with a lot of depth, this game has got it in spades, especially for the era that it was released in, and I'm going to give it a 9. So, when you add all of that up, you get a Commodore Room score of 30. And that's our review of Project Space Station. The game is a lot of fun, and if you get a chance to play it, I certainly recommend it. I would personally enjoy if there was a reboot of that using today's computers and today's technology. I would be pretty interested to play that game. I think it would be great. I hope you had fun hanging out in the Commodore Room with us today, and I hope you come hang out again with us real soon.